in this discussion between Alex O'Connor and David Benatar, they both use the term uh, state of neutrality in referring to beings that don't exist, people that do not exist.
So, in other words, I just want to kind of recap here to make sure I'm not missing anything. My argument was something like, I'm going to say that my child, who currently doesn't exist, is in a state of neutrality. The fact that he's not experiencing suffering is not a good thing. It's neutral. The fact that he's not experiencing pleasure is neutral because he doesn't exist. The moment he begins to exist, he will experience more suffering than pleasure. And for that reason, once he begins to exist, it would be a bad thing that he exists. But before he exists, as far as the being is concerned, like it's neutral.
Well, but there's a distinction to be drawn here. Obviously, this non-existent being is in a state of neutrality. That's obviously true. Obviously, there are no experiences in a non-existing being.
Mm-hmm.
So that's obviously true.
I'm going to show you why that doesn't make sense, why it's incoherent. That there is no state of neutrality to even refer to talk about. It's what could be considered a deity, just nonsense. And also, Alex used the term lack of experience in regards to uh, non-existent beings, as if there is a lack of experience.
You would say that it's still not worth bringing that being into existence because before they exist, the lack of that suffering is a good thing, but the lack of the pleasure isn't a bad thing. What I'm saying here is that if we consider the person who doesn't exist to be in a state of neutrality, as we did,
Yet another state I will show. Once again, it's completely nonsensical. So now I will attempt to convey what is called generic subjective continuity, and then explain why it dismantles and basically completely debunks David Benatar's asymmetry argument, which states that it would be better to not exist, better to not have been born. And I'm not so much concerned with the ethical part of it. He says it's always unethical to procreate, to give birth. Uh, what I'm going to focus on isn't really, it is relevant to that, but it's not going to be my main focus right now. It actually, generic subjective continuity kind of makes the ethical argument in as far as the asymmetry argument kind of irrelevant. There are scenarios where the ethics of it are relevant. Like, for example, if you give birth in a death camp or uh, during a famine, or give birth to a individual that is definitely going to have horrible deformities that are going to, or disease that's going to cause it to suffer badly. Knowing that you're doing this, knowing that um, they're definitely not going to have a good time. Let's say 80% of their life will be suffering, or even 50%. You know that there's going to be an overwhelming percentage of suffering in this person's life. So that's wrong. But anyways, moving on, I'm going to now attempt to convey generic subjective continuity. And if I cannot convey it, then you can check out, if I can't convey it here in this video, then I suggest watching a few of my other videos. Sometimes it requires kind of osmosis to understand it. After watching a few of my videos, sometimes that helps people understand it. But I'm going to try to do it the best I can right here in this video. Okay, let's start the thought experiment. First, imagine a universe completely devoid of all life. There are no sentient beings, and therefore there is no consciousness anywhere. There's no subjective experience anywhere. There's no experience. But then a single living brain comes to exist. For the sake of this thought experiment and to argue for generic subjective continuity, we need to imagine that consciousness is a product of brains, in the same way that Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris or Christopher Hitchens and many neuroscientists believe that consciousness is a function of the brain. They don't believe that consciousness is something that is tangible or made out of atoms or anything like that. consciousness is something that brains do. Your brain right now is doing consciousness, a single instance of consciousness. So anyways, back to the thought experiment. Imagine that a single brain pops into existence, and so there is consciousness. There is an instance of subjective experience. And now imagine that this brain dies, and so now there's no experience. But then, sometime after, or millennia after, it doesn't matter how long, and in a completely different location somewhere in the universe, composed of completely different atoms, another brain pops into existence, and it starts doing conscious experience or consciousness. And so there is two instances of experience coming to occur. They occurred in completely different places, but experience itself came to exist. Experience itself was occurring. And because the second one is still alive, the experience is still occurring. So now I'm going to reveal to you that the first brain was you. So you came to exist, this brain came to exist, and started doing consciousness, and so there was your subjective experience. Now, after you died, you didn't go into nothingness or a state of neutrality. You just ceased to exist. There is no state of neutrality or peaceful oblivion or anything like that, or a black void that would require you to witness such a black void. You don't exist anymore. And so you're gone, but then the other brain pops into existence. And so it starts doing experience. So there is experience after you died. It's just being done by this other brain. It's not a continuation of you. It's just that there's experience, and then it stopped, and then there's experience again. You have to look at you as objectively as just a brain, just another brain doing consciousness. And so it is the existence of a brain that is responsible for experience for brain 1 and for brain 2, for experience 1 and experience 2. It's just there's experience, and then there's experience again. So after you die, there will be experience. It's just that a different brain is responsible for that experience. So now I'm going to do another thought experiment, very similar to the last one. This time, it's once again a completely empty universe, a universe devoid of any life, any conscious life. And so there's no consciousness, nothing, no experience. This time, you come to exist. A brain comes to exist and starts doing consciousness. So there's subjective conscious experience. And this brain just happens to be you. And that you have to, once again, look at yourself as just a brain that's doing consciousness. So you could look at this brain objectively and kind of forget that it's you and just look at it as a brain that's doing consciousness. And so that brain is what's responsible for the imposition of conscious experience. That's a term that antinatalists use, is the imposition of consciousness. It means that consciousness is we're kind of hurled into this existence without our consent. It's imposed on us. And so here it is, you don't exist, there's no experience, and then suddenly experience begins due to the existence of a brain. A brain comes to exist, and then bam, there's experience. It doesn't matter that this brain is you or not, it's just the fact that there is a brain that starts to do conscious experience, and so experience is imposed. And now, let's rewind back to the beginning of this thought experiment, only this time a completely different brain comes to exist. And so, once again, consciousness is imposed, but it's via a completely different brain that is imposing this consciousness. You see, because you didn't exist before this consciousness started. So there is no actual you that this consciousness is being imposed for. It's just a matter of a brain being responsible for starting a consciousness. And so in the first scenario, a brain came to exist and started doing consciousness. And in the second scenario, a brain came to exist and started doing consciousness. And so in the very same way that in scenario one, a brain coming to exist and starting doing consciousness imposed consciousness onto you, the same thing is true for the second one. Only it's, we all call ourselves you, we all refer to ourselves as I, and we all call each other you. So it's a different I, it's a different you this time, in a kind of general, objective way, the same way that I am I and you refer to yourself as I. So there's this sense of self, this subjective experience. Subjectivity is a product of the brain. So there's subjectivity that exists via the first brain, which is you. Then there's subjectivity that exists via the second brain. And if you weren't born the first time, if that brain never came to exist, then there would still be the sense of being a self. It would just be a different self. If you weren't born, then instead of this life, it would have been the other life that did come to exist, as opposed to nothingness or, a deprivation of experience or a state of neutrality, as David Benatar and Alex O'Connor suggested. That they suggest that if you don't exist, that there's this state of neutrality. So I'm saying that instead of that state of neutrality, that would be canceled out by the mere existence of a brain doing consciousness. So consciousness is imposed either way, despite no matter which brain is the one responsible for imposing consciousness. It's inescapable, because there's no you to escape it. There's no you to be spared from this consciousness. It's just, that's the only experience there is. There is no state of neutrality. That would be an experience. There is experience being done by a brain, and so that is the experience. Just as, if you were the only one that existed in the universe, then that is the experience. But if this other brain is the only one that exists in the universe, then that is the experience. So, this really negates the asymmetry argument, because the asymmetry argument would depend on there being an escape from experience had you not existed. Now, Benatar is saying that, if I were never born, then of course there would be no Ted. But as far as there being experience, what Benatar truly wants to escape, what he's truly offering to the non-existent people is a state of neutrality, or something that he considers better, just because you don't exist. So if I weren't born, then instead of this life, it would be one of the lives that does exist. So there is no neutrality or state of whatever would be better, state of deprivation, a lack of experience. That is this perpetual lack of experience, a ongoing blankness. That it doesn't exist. There is only experience in these scenarios. So it's inescapable. And so, yeah, if I hadn't been born, then there would be no Ted, but there would still be experience, because other people and animals and so on and so forth were born. So, and let's say all life in the universe ended, they all died. There's still no state of neutrality. There's still no peaceful oblivion or whatever else. And that's the thing, is Benatar's asymmetry argument would depend on there being a state of blankness, or an ongoing perpetual state of the appreciation of not existing. But if you've ever been put under anesthesia, then you know that any period of time that you're unconscious, that's skipped over from your point of view. It's just unconsciousness, complete unconsciousness is like a proverbial time machine. It's just snap of a finger, it's skipped over from your point of view. And so this makes it clear that only experience is what's experienced. And when I say only experience, I mean experience, capital E, noun is experienced, verb. Only experienced noun is experienced, verb. So there's no escape from experience. And any time that there is no experience, there's no sigh of relief. It's just, so talking about the end of the universe and what it would be like for there to never arise consciousness again is kind of, well, it breaks down into incoherence. It's just, we can't really talk about that, honestly, because there would be no appreciation of that lack of consciousness. And I'm saying he depends on such a state to exist. The asymmetry argument depends on it. But then this comes to the question of, are there multiverses? Is the multiverse real, or are there endless universes? And if there are, then there's most likely life out there somewhere else. And our universe itself is just so vast that there's most likely life somewhere else. The processes that brought about life, and who knows what other processes could also bring about life. So, there's the Big Bounce theory. There's the fact that we just recently discovered, well, some scientists have concluded that the universe is actually twice as old as we thought it was. It's not 14 billion years old. It's something around more like 26 billion years old. So there's just a lot we don't know. As far as all that goes, the heat death of the universe and the end of the universe goes, we can only speculate. But right now, we should focus on the fact that there is no alternative to experience. Only experience is experienced. So I think I've made it clear that if you weren't born, then instead of this life, it would have been one of the lives that does exist. So what does this say about morality as far as bringing someone into existence, causing a birth? Because Benatar, he kind of applies his theory to all life, it's all-encompassing. It's life itself is bad, and according to him, in the asymmetry argument, it isn't that he doesn't. The asymmetry argument doesn't say this life is bad or that life is bad. It says all life is bad. So it's a sweeping, all-encompassing view. It's a dichotomy, really. No matter who you are, no matter which life it is, it's bad, even if it's the best possible life. So, but because of what I pointed out here, it's called generic subjective continuity. Because of this, it shows that the effort to have non-life or endless perpetual unconsciousness or a lack of experience, because of generic subjective continuity, it shows that that's not attainable, that goal or the ideal is unattainable. And so it kind of puts something else, it puts the spotlight on individual lives instead, that we should focus on individual circumstances for individual lives. We should not cause births or cause people to exist in certain situations, or that we know will be born with terrible illnesses, so on and so forth. We should strive to give birth to the best lives that could exist, the best environments, so on and so forth. And because one of those lives could come after this one ends. Because again, there won't be endless nothingness after we die. Instead, just as non-existence was followed by this life via a brain being born, so too will death be followed by a life via a brain being born. So this gives us yet another incentive to make sure other lives are the best they can possibly be, along with morality itself, just empathy itself and sympathy. So I believe this generic subjective continuity is what Alex was missing to make a solid case against the asymmetry argument. So yeah, I believe I've covered everything that I set out to cover. Hopefully Alex watches this, and hopefully David Benatar watches it as well. So I feel like I've accomplished, I've effectively explained generic subjective continuity here and why it defeats the asymmetry argument. So if you're interested in understanding it further, if you feel like you didn't get it, watch my other videos. Thanks for watching.